Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. So, are you tired of losing in the first 10 moves? Today I'm exposing the most common opening mistakes that players can make under 1000 and exactly how you can punish them. So, whether you're a beginner or climbing the ladder, these are mistakes show up nearly every game, and once you recognize them, you'll start winning fast. So, let's now get into the first mistake. Now let's get into the first common mistake, or the first mistake, bringing out your queen early. So for instance, in this position of playing as white, you play your pawn to e4, the king's pawn opening. Main opening can come out of this opening, and I like it. Then your opponent also responds with the king's pawn to e5. Then you play queen to h5. Now in this position, opponent just plays knight to c6, developing their knight. And then now it's your turn. Let's take you play bishop to c4, trying to play this checkmate, and then opponent just plays queen to e7. Then now you try to develop and play knight to c3, and now your opponent plays knight to f6. Now your opponent is gaining momentum. Your opponent is attacking your queen, and just by attacking your queen, your opponent gains an extra move. So your queen has to move right now. Then you move your queen back. Now you've wasted those, I think, 2 moves that you made with your queen. Then your opponent just plays knight to d4. Now in this position, your opponent is the one who has an advantage, and you're playing as white, and as white is try to control the center and have more advantage because you're the one who starts the game. So in this position, you're the one who's defending, whereas it should be black who's defending in this position. So as white, you should try to avoid bringing out your queen early and try to develop other pieces. For instance, you can play the Italian game, which is the easiest opening to play, like playing knight here. Then opponent maybe plays knight here too, trying to play the Petrov, and you can play knight here, or you ignore it and play bishop here. Anything works. So you should try to, but I suggest bringing out your knight and not try to play these tricks. But you should try to play the most common openings, like playing the royal pairs, playing the Italian game, and improve your games like that instead of trying to bring out your queen without any plan. So that was the first mistake that most players make. So now let's get into the second mistake. Now the second mistake is the f-pawn move. So you're still playing as white, and then you play the king's pawn, then opponent also plays the king's pawn to e5, and then you play pawn to f3. This is one of the worst mistakes you could make in this position, because this gives black advantage immediately. So you play this move, and then black decides to play pawn to f5, and then you choose to take this. Then opponent plays pawn to d5, looking to attack your pawn. And because you don't want to lose your pawn in this position, you try to protect your pawn, and this also opens up this. So this f-pawn moves weakens your king, and even if you don't get to this sequence, it weakens your king because there's also a check threat here. Let's take your opponent chooses to play the queen first with a check. So you're weakening your king side. So your knight cannot develop. You covered the diagonal for your queen. Your bishop has only one diagonal, but the bishop doesn't really get affected in this position. But that pawn move really affects your king side, and also makes it difficult for you to castle the king side, because there's gonna be more attack on that side. So this is one move you should avoid playing. Like I showed you now, this can happen, and then you're gonna try to, let's say you try to protect your pawn. Of course, you're gonna try to not to lose your pawn, and then opponent just plays this with a check, and then now you have to move your king, and you don't want to move your king in the opening, because that gives your opponent more ammo to attack you, like playing knight here and also playing bishop here, or even if not playing knight, just playing bishop here, threatening this check. But the most common move is to play knight here, and also bringing in the knight to attack the king, because there's check threat here. So you should avoid also playing this pawn move, and also just play your Italian game and royal pairs opening. So now let's get into the third mistake. Now another mistake is not developing your bishops and knights early, because this loses the control of the center. Let's take in this position, let's flip the board. You're playing as black, then opponent starts with the king's pawn opening to e4, then he decides to play pawn to a6, then opponent plays pawn to d4, and then you choose to play pawn to e6. I really don't understand playing the pawns on the end of the board, because that gives the opponent the control of the center. No opponent can just develop the knight, and then when you try to develop an opponent just attacks your knight. No opponent has an advantage of controlling the entire center. Now it's difficult for your bishops to come out, and if you given your opponent an advantage in the first, I think 4 moves. Yeah, I think it's the first 4 moves or the first 3 moves. You've given opponent an advantage. So I also don't understand playing the feather pawns from the board or the end of the board pawns, because those pawns do nothing. So every time when you're playing chess, you should try to control the center. Even if you're playing as black, you should try to control the center. You don't have to, when you're that, you know that you're that good, you don't have to control the center. You can just play the Caro-Kann in this position. So because the Caro-Kann loses the control of the center but also protects the king, so you should try to control the center or play an opening that doesn't put you in a vulnerable position or stops your knights and bishops from developing, because your opponent is going to take that advantage by playing these 2 pawns and controlling the entire center. So every time you're playing as black, you should try to also control the center. You can also play queen here, trying to play the Scandinavian, and then now you're controlling the center. So every time when you're playing as black, you should try to fight for the center. Even if you don't win, you won't win most of the battles of controlling the center, but you should also try to control the center. So, and also try to develop your knights and bishops. This is about developing your knights and bishops. So if the center is being controlled by the pawns, you won't be able to develop your knights and bishops, because the pawns will have already covered the squares that the bishops and knights need to come out. So I think that's the third one. Now let's go to the fourth mistake. I think I've also covered the fourth one in the knights and bishops mistake. It's all about controlling the center. So your opponent plays knight to also the pawn to e4, and then don't play moves like this move, the orange defense. You don't know how to play the orange defense, but you just try to play. You don't even know that is the orange defense. You're just playing pawn to b6, and then opponent just gonna control the center. There's many ways to control the center. Opponent can just play knight here, it's fine, and then you try to, I don't know why most people try to do this in this position. Try to control the center and bring out your pieces, bring out your knight. Now it's difficult for you to bring out your knight, and you didn't move your king's pawn. Now you cannot bring out your bishops. You didn't move your king's pawn. Now you cannot bring out your white squared bishop. So I covered a lot on the previous mistakes, but try to control the center. Every time when you play chess and you know you're not at that level yet, try to control the center. When you control the center, then it's gonna be easier for you to play the middle game. You can't play the middle game just taking punches. You're just defending the entire game. That's a recipe for losing games. So try not to defend the entire game. Try to have counters. Even if you're being attacked, try to have counters, because you're playing as black and you're gonna be attacked. But try to have counters. And at least when you're fighting for the center, for instance in this position, opponent plays king's pawn, then you play king's pawn, then opponent plays knight, and then you can play knight here and protect your pawn. Then opponent plays maybe pawn here, this is also fine. Then you can also play knight, and even if your opponent starts with the knight, you can also play a knight and bring out your knight. And as you can see, you've opened up your dark squared bishop, and the next move your opponent tries to open, your opponent maybe moves their left squared bishop. It's fine, just play games like this. These games look boring, but they help improve your position and give you better chances of winning and have a better middle game. So try to control the center or try to fight for the center. You're then gonna have great games and you're gonna enjoy chess. So if you try to play those feather pawn moves, you're just gonna lose every time, and your opponent will always have an advantage and control the middle game. So try to control the center. I think that's the final mistakes that people make, or the final mistake that people make. I think that's it from me. So if you have seen these mistakes in your games or made them, drop a comment with your rating. and try to avoid them and improve your game just playing normal chess. Don't try flashy stuff if you don't know what you're doing. And please subscribe for more lessons like this, like, comment, and level up your game. And until we see each other on the next video, that's it from me.